Welcome back from your coffee break. We're having a panel discussion right now. So I'm going to just go ahead and kick it off with questions from you instead of from me. So whatever questions you have to any of the panelists or any of the speakers, go right ahead and ask. Among the panelists, though, I have to introduce are Raul Calvo, who is an architect and works in the Singapore-based Cityform Lab. And they have a project right now exhibited in the Architecture Museum as well, which you can see. And then Ralph Martin Soe, who is an e-residency expert and a smart cities expert as far as I know, as far as the LinkedIn page is concerned. So these are our panelists. Go right ahead and shoot the questions. The people with the microphones are already in the hall, so just raise your hand and we'll take the questions now. Okay, this I usually call the welcome to Estonia part, where nobody is like wanting to ask questions first.
Questions, but also challenges, ideas,
yeah.
Anything you like to share. Anything you like to share. Yes.
Okay, perfect. I guess I'm just gonna stay here if you guys don't mind.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for making really amazing presentations this morning. And actually, I wanted to ask maybe a very particular question of Carlo. So, I mean, you were basically obviously pioneer in starting to work with big urban data, mobility data, etc. 2006, 2007, which was like 1,000 years ago, right? And now things really developed. And in your presentation, you show lots of projects. You can mix different years, and it looks beautiful. But I wonder how your own thinking has changed. Because I also started working around 2007, but with cultural data, and I'm like reflecting now on 8 years of experience. So maybe some reflections related to the big topic, or just your own thinking about city of the data and how things changed in the last 8 years.
Totally. Well, it's a great question. Thanks for asking. I think, if I had to say at the beginning, when we started doing this almost 10 years ago, you could do a lot by analyzing urban data, but really it was difficult to close the loop. People didn't have a smartphone, so of course you could use the data to analyze the city. It was the old idea. Élisée Reclus, one of the first modern planners, said, you cannot plan a city unless you survey it first. So you could use all this data for surveying the city, but then, it was difficult to close the loop through people. And I think one of the things we've seen over the past few years with smartphones taking over is actually data in people's pockets create beautiful feedback loops. The reason we have Uber now and not 5 or 10 years ago, the reason we got Airbnb now and not 5 or 10 years ago, and many of these things is really that the data comes back into our pockets, and then it creates all these feedback loops with people. So certainly this is something that changed a lot and that we can leverage today. Well, it was much more difficult to leverage it at the beginning 10 years ago when everybody had some of those old-fashioned phones, and it was difficult to access the data on the phone itself. If you look at so this is about what answering your question about, what we saw changing from 10 years ago to today. If you look at the future, what we see is that so far, we've seen a lot of what researchers call cyber-physical system, the convergence of the digital and the physical. And I think what we see more and more is actually convergence with the biological. The beautiful thing is, and I haven't shown them because the projects are just at the beginning, but two of the key projects we're doing today actually use a lot of genetic material. They use genomes in cities collected by National Geographic in order to understand how well cities work in order to bring us together. One interesting thing about cities is that one of the reasons they bring us together is that we can exchange ideas, but also exchange chromosomes. So, we actually can reproduce and exchange chromosomes. I mean, how well they work for that, how, cities promote segregation or integration. That's something we're looking at through the lens also of genetics. In another project, we're actually looking at complete genomics to look at, you're all familiar with a microbiome. The microbiome is that basically for every cell in our body, we got around 10 viruses or bacteria living with us. However, at the scale of the city, this has never been measured. And if you go and look into sewage, we develop a little robot that's still being tested. It goes into sewage, gets sampled regularly, and then we look at all the viruses and bacteria there and try to use that in order to better understand the health of the city. It's amazing what you can do. Based on that, you can actually tell in a neighborhood the obesity rate or the problems with diabetes, and you can even, what we are hoping, but what seems possible is look at epidemics before they happen. You find actually the influenza virus there before you detect it in the city. So I didn't present that because these are projects we started a few months ago and we are still working on them. We don't have the full validated scientific results. But if I look forward, I would see a convergence between cyber-physical, between the digital and the physical, and more also the biological. This kind of co-evolution between the artificial and the natural that becomes more and more integrated.
Maybe following.
It's not the screen.
Okay, yeah, closer. Following on this, my question would be that to what extent we can see the change in routines as well, or in governance mechanisms, because when we're talking about smart cities, we see like a lot of technological change, and we see a change in other areas as well. But what we don't see is that we don't see change in routines. People still do work 8 hours a day, for example. It's a routine that has been there forever. And now the question is that if there are solutions that effectively reduce or effectively increase the efficiency, but can we work 7 hours instead? Probably we can, but could we change the system? Other thing related to that is that elections, for example, or government systems, institutions, elections are in every 4 years nowadays. Question is why? Obviously, like decades ago, that was a pragmatic thing that people just came from their farms together after every 4 years to vote. But nowadays, I could actually vote every morning from a technological point of view. From the institution point of view, nothing has changed. And do you see some kind of difference in that area as well?
Maybe let me take it, but I really would like to share it with also with all the other panelists. Regarding the second point, well, I'm not sure that having an election every morning would be a good idea for two reasons. That yes, some of the reasons we used to vote every 4 years, 7 years in some countries, it is because there was a cost associated with voting. But at the same time, if you really want to lead, think about Churchill. Some of the decisions he made during World War II were extremely unpopular, but then people realized just later those were the right decisions. So in a certain sense, leadership also means that you need to be able to take decisions that people might be against at the beginning, but then they will understand those are the right decisions. And so I think that's why probably you don't want to vote every morning when that might disrupt the kind of the longer term. The same happens in companies. Companies got CEOs who will be very unpopular. Think about also what happened to Steve Jobs at some points. But actually, if you can think about the long term, then you can prove that you had the vision, you were right. Otherwise, you tend to just look at if you vote day by day, then the framework for people to be evaluated will be just tomorrow, and you will stop thinking about the longer term of the country. The other thing why you probably don't want to vote every day is, even if it is possible, if it doesn't cost anymore, is that the institution itself has a lot of inertia. And every time you change a government, then you need to change some of the people, and those people need to learn the new job and so on. And even when you think about the United States, when a new president is elected, well, it takes quite a bit of time for the machine, for the engine to run in a synchronized way. So it would be terrible if you were to vote after 6 months by the time people have just started taking over to replace it. So I'm saying that just starting from the second part of the question, from the first part, I think the first one is very exciting. It is about, how should society react? And I think here there's a huge difference between architecture and design as we can do it today and as we used to do it before. Now, we were discussing before there the same topic, but if you look at design in the 20th century, there was really the idea that an architect designer could make decisions for everybody. Think about Le Corbusier presenting the Plan Voisin for Paris. You know, his idea, there's that beautiful picture with himself at the Pavillon de l'Esprit Nouveau in Paris, where he presents his ideas. His ideas were incidentally quite simple, were basically demolish all of Paris, just leave Notre Dame and a couple of other things as a souvenir from the past, and replace everything with cross-based modernist skyscrapers. Well, if you look at the picture, it was the idea, that picture that everybody knows, Le Corbusier with his hand, that's the hand of the architect, but almost the hand of God, is the idea that basically the architect could be the person to decide the future for millions of people, even without asking them. Now, I think that is over, has to be over. I think that's not the way we have to do things. I think the role of the architect and designer can be something very different and much more collaborative. And the way we try to think about it is the designer going back to the very root of the meaning of the word, which is what Herbert Simon, Nobel Prize winner and a great sociologist of the 20th century, beautifully put by saying, science looks, investigates how things are. Design looks at how things could be. And so design is really about seeing how the world around ourselves could be. If you take an analogy with natural evolution, what happens there, the way we move from being unicellular organisms to be so complex, beautiful systems as we are today, is through mutations and then selections. And then if you take the same analogy, apply to the artificial, to the world of the artificial, then what you see is really design as the ability to introduce mutation into the system. As designers, we can actually see different potentials. Sometimes we also want to see what is not just utopian, but what is dystopian. We don't want to see just the positive, also negative, in order to almost create antibodies in society. Is what white hacking does. Hacking can be good. White hat hacking is good. Is it highlights a vulnerability, and then so we can fix it, we can patch it, and so that it doesn't do harm. In a similar way, when we did the first project about using cell phone data at the Venice Biennale, we knew that was something potentially very interesting for designers and planners, but also potentially dystopian. But we wanted to have an open conversation. And so that goes, I think that our role as designer is to highlight the potential of the present, highlight how we could transform things, highlight, how the world could be, to use Herbert Simon's word, but then to show it in a tangible way so that you can have an open discussion, so that people can say how we can build together a tomorrow, so people can have a say and help, make a decision on which way we want to go. It's like a critical discussion that happens after having proposed and made something tangible. And I think here is really where it connects to your point, because then society, in a certain sense, responds to some of this potential. And you're right, some of the decisions could be that we work less, could be that we change our political system, it could be basically that if we make the potential tangible in a very concrete way, then we can have this participatory discussion and understand, as a team, as a society, about which way we want to go, and by doing that, we kind of build a future together.
I have a question to you. The smartphone data, which you showed in your presentation, of course, this is one of the areas where Ericsson is heavily working on. But I see one thing that it's not really taking off. The systems are there, the possibilities are there, the data is huge, which are in the network. But we see still that I don't know if in Tallinn anybody is using that type of data. The amount of data is huge. What should happen? Who owns the data? Operator, private person? How should we release that data and make it available to you guys? What should happen?
Well, first of all, I'll say something. There's two things. On the one hand, a lot of this data is used. If you have an Android phone, and if you actually accepted some of the terms and conditions by Google, you are sharing a lot of your data very fine-grained with Google, and that's actually how you get a lot of the results when you see a Google map with Google traffic. It tells you so beautifully today, there's a traffic jam here, go this way, go the other way. Well, all of that is coming from data which is collected from your phones in a way that you might be transparent or non-transparent, but it's collected from your phone. It is true, and actually, I didn't mention it, but we just in the interest of full disclosure, we're actually working with Ericsson. I don't know if you know it, but it's a project that was discussed with Hans Vestberg and I've seen what is the potential we can get out of this data. And today, there's a lot of value that is being investigated in universities, and a lot of people here in Estonia also were among the pioneers looking at this. Like Üllar Mark, like Rein Ahas, people who are at Tartu University, their team. So there's a lot of value that can be extracted to better understand, say, society, communities, a social network, and many other things. You're right that the data collected by the operator today still is not so used in the way that, for instance, Google uses or in the way that academia uses it. And I think there, one of the key questions, yes, is the fact that, I think it's two points probably. What we've seen a lot with operators is also operators have had like a very fat cow so far. They had a lot of big margins and so on. So they, in a certain sense, they didn't have incentives in looking at which value could be extracted from the data. They were making a lot of tons of money in the past year, over the past 10, 15 years, just by providing cell phone services to people, so they didn't have much incentives, and so many of them were saying, well, should I risk it that maybe some of my customers are not going to be happy? We saw that with AT&T in the United States, and they say, well, we want to stay into our business. Other things could be a bit risky, and we don't know exactly what the value is. But if you do that, you don't experiment that much. I think the situation is changing now that many operators have been challenged. There's a lot of data. People are switching to voice over IP using data. So some of the traditional revenue streams are drying up, and I think we are seeing more and more usage. But the questions are there now for all of us to discuss, is about who owns the data, who should benefit from that, and how can you create a condition where there's not information asymmetry, where somebody has all the data, gets money out of it, you don't know what's going on, and so how you make a transparent kind of connection between people who generate the data and people who then could exploit it.
The data sits in Google, I understand that, and that's where it's going, and they have all the information, they can sell it. But I would like to have the Tallinn city government to have the data of all what's happening in Tallinn and creating a better city.
I mean, maybe I interrupt for a second. I don't think that actually one of the aim is to give all the data to people. It's like one of the aim for the operator is to give a better reception, like you can analyze in the back end. It do not have to be explicitly provided to the users in that sense. Like you just make your things work and seamless. And I think some of these data-driven things should go background more. We don't have to visualize them all the time. It's just like if they're working in the background, they make things run smoothly. So what I feel like sometimes just to bring things more social aspect, like there's a lot of expertise in people. Like for example, if you take the doctors in Estonia, so Estonian government provided tons of services, like how do you give out recipes or write down check people's health insurance, and this system just don't work. And the doctors are losing a lot of time just because the things don't work. In a back end, in a front end, everybody in Estonia knows that the ID card system is just a nightmare to sign any documents. So like, it much better works like for example, the mobile signing system. Like there's like a lot of things what this technology brings in, and by using the technology, experts are losing time. So if we take like 2,000 doctors who lose every day a couple of hours just to get through all the IT, we don't get the service from doctors. So I think that it needs to be very broad spectrum. How do we move continuously through time? It's not like we break, that's the revolution, and we start using all digital, and let's forget everything in the past. It's like we need to keep these long professions also moving on. I don't know, that's my little bit critical, but I'm actually positive on a general tone.
But if I understand correctly, you're saying, in a certain sense, in a pragmatic way, you're saying, well, if this, it doesn't matter too much if people have access or not and how you do it, but the ultimate goal is that the system is more efficient. It seems to me that that's this.
I mean, it's sometimes like we put it to the public too soon. Like the feedback loop is like, oh yeah, it's kind of works, let's start using it, but it actually do not work. Like, for example, if you download the ID card software, the one of the sentence there is like, please check your MD5 checksum. Like nobody, I don't know how many of you in a room have ever checked your ID card software, and the hash numbers, they are not easy to check. I mean, it requires that, I don't believe that we all need to be professional IT guys to operate in a modern world. It's just like, IT should go in a more background and be a solid, almost disappear. It's like, imagine you go to home and you need to check your electricity, like how to put all the frequencies working and all the lamps. Like, you just want it to disappear in the background and be natural. And like making things more natural, I think it should be an end goal, not to be explicit and the problem in users.
Yeah, just two things come to mind. When you mention computing disappears in the background, it's a beautiful sentence, and actually it's one of the first times I've read it in one of the oldest articles I've read. It is this article by Mark Weiser about ubiquitous computing. He talks about, the era of calm computing. Computing disappears into the background, and then the front end is something very simple, is these kind of calm technologies where we can continue doing the things we like to do. So I just want to mention this because you mentioned this kind of disappearance into the background. But I just want to mention, maybe we discuss it later. Still, I see your point, but I think philosophically we still need to look at how do we treat the data? Who has access? Do we tolerate asymmetry? Do we make everything accessible to everybody, which would be one extreme? Do we want to keep tracking data so that we know some people have access to this and that and not to something else? Well, I think those questions are very important questions. So even if we take a more pragmatic stance, then I think those philosophical questions we need to look at.
So
maybe.
guys,
One second.
you've been having a very happy discussion, and it's a bit of a technological determinism, but I think it's important, I would like to ask a panel to say something about the human cost of first industrial revolution, because so far every second word is efficiency, operators, and we know that first industrial revolution changed society, created cities, created love, created marriage, modern marriage. Second industrial revolution did other things, and I think Mr. Suzuki has a much more realistic vision of the future, where we're going to have very high-tech society, houses, and we're going to have very simple houses. And I think that your third industrial revolution, as we see in Mr. Lackman's slide, is going to coexist with dozens of millions of people working for $4 to $11 a day in factories in China, Mexico City. So can we talk about this a bit, so the discussion is a bit more realistic? Maybe Mr. For example, Lackman can say something about it. You didn't have a single human picture in your slides. It was all graphs, very fascist, I mean, if Ericsson is going to remain relevant, you have to, you can't just pretend these things don't exist. So you have to be a bit smarter and address them.
I turn it another way. If we see now that we have 2 billion mobile broadband connections in the world, and there are a lot of people yet not with a mobile broadband connection, think about a writer in Africa and how easy it is for him to distribute his work now over the kind of internet compared to 10 to 20 years back. And he can come out of that $2 or $4 a day gap, if you understand what I mean. He can distribute his work, art, music, pictures, whatever. He can sell it to in 2019 to 8 billion people in the world. It will change his life. We have a lot of different examples when the mobility, being able to be connected, will change people's lives.
No, I completely agree. And we know, for example, internet's saved culture in many post-Soviet countries because it was the only place where writers could put their works. But since the panel called Industrial Revolution, maybe you can reflect a little bit about this third industrial revolution, how it's different from the second, and how it may affect kind of like what would be human cost and how we can make this human cost a bit softer, right?
Part of the industrial revolution also will be that we will have assisting systems for example, elderly people, so they can work more efficiently, or they have support in their work, so they don't have to be worried that I'm doing the right or wrong thing. This will be a part of the industrial revolution also. So it's not only kind of bad things that jobs will be taken away. Of course, unfortunately, some jobs will be taken away, but new jobs will be created. I don't have all the answers to kind of the problems in the world, but there will be a lot of new jobs created, hopefully with higher salaries, higher demands, need for more education.
Like for example? For example?
I think the IT specialists in Estonia is earning a lot of money compared to other sectors today, for example. I mean, this might be a naive example, but we see the change in the world. Of course, we cannot change the life of 8 billion people, but step by step.
Let me jump in here because I feel a bit responsible because I said, you know, people had challenges, so now the conversation has turned more confrontational. So let me say actually 3 things very quickly. The first one is every technology starts somewhere. Think about cell phones like, you know, 20 years ago, they were super expensive. None of us in this room would have had a cell phone. They were, you know, really exclusive for an elite. Now we're at a condition where the whole planet, there's more cell phones than people on the planet, basically. And those cell phones have allowed beautiful examples of leapfrogging. They say, you know, people like fishermen in Sri Lanka now being able to get real-time information about the price of fish and not being exploited by other people, about places like Kenya being much more advanced than Europe in terms of mobile banking. 2 weeks ago, I ended up on a refugee train. I took a train without knowing from Austria to Germany, and it ended up to be one of the trains that was full with refugees. Well, you know, it was an incredible experience. I talked to a lot of people. I saw these people coming from Syria. It was like Syria inside. Outside, you had this kind of green, lush, German, Austrian landscape, but inside was like being in Damascus. But each of them had a smartphone and was using it to survive. So I think we see beautiful things. Every technology has to start somewhere. So yes, we need to always have in our minds the people who live on on a few dollars per day, but at the same time, as designers, I believe we need to look at the potential we have because that potential will trickle down. If we had thought about this 20 years ago, say we're not going to do cell phones because they are super expensive, thousands of dollars each, as they were at the beginning, and you know, we don't need to do that, we need to focus on something else in favelas, well, probably we would not have empowered favelas today to do what some of these beautiful examples of leapfrogging as well. So every technology, yes, we need to have that in mind, that we want to make sure that we use it to bridge gaps, but at the same time, it has to start somewhere, and we need to accept that. But that leads to the other parts, which is, you know, then what is happening with all these new technologies? Are we going to lose all the jobs? And I think, you know, that, again, if we had had the same conference, like, you know, a few thousand years ago right here, at the time, everybody was just growing, I don't know, what do people grow here in terms of I mean, in Italy, they were growing tomatoes, or, you know, here they would be growing, or they would be just farming. And if somebody has said, you know, farming will be only a few percentage of the population doing farming, people have said, oh my God, what is everybody else going to do? Everybody's going to be unemployed. And we've seen that over and over again. We've seen a transition from agriculture to industry, to the first industry, to the second industrial revolution. And so we've seen it over and over again. So what has happened is actually that we invent other things. Technology allows us to extend our reach. We don't need to put that effort to produce stuff anymore. I think overall it's a beautiful thing. I don't think it was living what people used to do in the past century, to do what a robot could do, to turn a bolt all their life. I think, you know, that was not life. I think so overall this is positive. The question is, you know, how do we make sure, again, that everybody is going to share the benefit? That, you know, that these benefits, you know, that it's not somebody doesn't do anything, somebody else is, because they have capital to buy the robots, is getting that. So I think, how do we manage the transition? Because transition is the gradient, the transition period when some people have studied something, have done something all of their life, and they get at one point that thing doesn't exist anymore. So I want to say, from this point of view, I'm sure that we've seen this over and over again. I'm not concerned about not generating new things to do for us. The key question, again, is how do we make sure that the benefits and there are clear benefits for society. If a robot can do something that we needed a human to do all of their lives, I think that's a great thing. The important thing, let's make sure that the benefits we get are shared equally, or in the way are shared, and let's make sure that we manage the transition so that if some people, some classes, some categories are in trouble, then we make sure that we take care of that.
I just want to agree on the last part. Because like the social responsibility in modern society is super important if you don't want to hurt people with revolution. It just like all the revolutions so far has been like hurting someone, and sometimes we kill people, sometimes we don't, but it's just like we create more poverty and all the harsh conditions. But I think if you want to do a first intelligent revolution, we should be socially responsible for all the participants.
In a way, yes, totally agree. But now in my ICT sector, now just following up what Seth and Raul was previously saying as well, but the question was, first of all, who controls the data? Is it Microsoft or is it Tallinn city government, for example? But secondly, you were saying about the ID card system in Estonia, which is actually a brilliant system, but why it doesn't work ideally is that you have to work with all the big browsers, and every time they do changes, you have to ask your customers to do changes as well. If that would have been a system developed by Microsoft, for example, that would be automized. But now the question is, do we want it to be that much automized that you don't have locally developed solutions anymore? And that's the bigger question, because that's a question of ecosystem as well, and what the president was talking in the morning as well. But now we have to think about the architecture in a way that enables open participation in the market. Because otherwise, all the big vendors take it over, and they set the rules, and they earn the profits. They earn the billions of dollars, and the local people, they don't get anything. And now the question is how to protect ourselves from this.
How to protect us from getting ripped off by the Microsoft, or like dominated by Microsoft?
How to make equal market for local participants as well, and for local communities as well, because smart cities is pretty much about somebody designing a city and selling you the concept. So what if there is like a brilliant concept implemented in Tallinn, and now everybody would have to follow the logic of this concept in a way that we don't have local pubs anymore, but it's designed by somebody, a computer programmer in India, who thinks that this is where the pub should be, or this is where the park should be, not the local people thinking where it should be.
I guess we'll take a question from here.
Hi, I'm Solveig Janke, and used to be communications manager for Ericsson when 3G arrived, but now I do communications for the Academy of Arts. So, but I have two questions therefore as well, one for Seth Luckman. And you remember when 3G came, the challenges were that the technology was so ready, but there were really no services, or so to speak, apps available that were ready to be provided for the users. And actually, that's why also the mobile operators hesitated with deploying the technology, because there were really no services and applications available. So that was the challenge at the time. But then, of course, there was a blast of applications nowadays. Every day there are new applications created and so forth, and services born. What do you think is the challenge of this industrial revolution? What do you think should be prepared in advance so that there will be proper?
First thing, I think it will change. When the 3G came, it was a data-centric approach, and of course the services were not yet there, and not even the handsets were there before the networks were out. But now I think it will be different. The sensors are out there, the self-driving cars will be out there. There will be a lot of applications, devices, cyber physical systems that will need more and better communications. So this time I think that the applications and services and devices will be there out before actually the network has been rolled out in the phase that 3G was rolled out. 15 years ago. So I think it has changed a bit in that sense.
And my other question is to Edward Suzuki. You were talking about your flying house and that you wanted to build one 45 years ago. Now, in view of this new technology, do you think you will build your flying house?
If it's true that we have sent man to the moon, a flying house is a cinch, I think. It could be done overnight, really. But, you know, it's really providing and supplying the needs for the market. So that's why we have abandoned even freedom. And we opted to do something that was sellable readily. But I think what we need to do as architects is to introduce new ideas, new possibilities, and sort of enlighten the public that certain things that may not be you know, readily available to their minds are, you know, perfectly possible realistically. And so, in my mind, Flying House was sort of an educational proposal. Most people, even today, would prefer to live in more or less a traditional triangular, you know, pitched roof house rather than a flying house. But should we propose possibilities and to propose such in a very reasonable or decently priced ways, and to be able to show them that certain new lifestyles are possible and they have certain merits as compared to the old ways of living, then I think we could start to round the square heads of the general public to start accepting new ways of living. And I think this sort of conditioning is very important to take place first. Otherwise, it meets hostility. Does this answer your question?
I don't know if you guys are watching at your clock and thinking, when are we going to go to lunch? You are? Okay. The ones who are can leave. But
Maybe
as long as the panel is okay with continuing the conversation for another 10-15 minutes, shall we?
I have a question to Carlo. I always get asked this question, but kind of technology is not maybe the best thing, that we should not always talk about technology and what can we do for the poor people and so on. But I reversed the question to Carlo. 25 years ago came internet, mobility, open source program, etc. Where would we be now if this wouldn't have happened? Have anybody thought about that? Maybe a difficult question, but...
Where we would be if we didn't have, if internet and so on had not happened.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I don't know. It's difficult to look at the past and look at history by saying what if something else had happened. You know, what if somebody else had won World War II? It's always difficult to see where we would be. So I don't know if we can answer it, but certainly what I can say is that the important thing is that some of the decisions have been, like you were saying, the result of a collaborative choice, the result of, you know, of looking at the potential and deciding, having an open, critical conversation about that in society and deciding which way to go. And I think that's the important thing. It's more the method which is important than exactly where we have been. And other than that, you know, I think the internet has been the most amazing thing we've ever done. You know, all these things also look at some of the most profound things we want to do in life. It's about, you know, how we can access knowledge. Has been the human struggle for thousands of years, and for the first time 20 years ago, just to find something that was published in another country would take, you know, days in a library, travel maybe to another place. Now you got everything at your fingertips. Is beautiful as a way to bring us together around knowledge. In the same way as Facebook is not doing anything new, is doing what the well in the village used to do. We were saying it this morning. You know, in the old days, you had the village and the well, and people would go there and share ideas and updates with their friends. And, you know, and then we lost some of that in the 20th century. We bring it back because we got a digital well, something that brings us together around a page on Facebook. So those things really look at, and that's the important thing, fuck technology, forget about technology. The question is, how can we go back to the important things, the meaningful things for human life? And certainly accessing knowledge is one of them. Certainly having friends, having a network, being, you know, exchanging idea with other people is another very important one. And I would add something else that goes against all what you've heard so far. And the thing again is that something that I was thinking about when I was looking at Edward's presentation is that yes, we want to look at the potential for architecture to transform. And that's going to be exciting, and that means we're going to see more and more buildings and objects that behave like animals, that respond to us and so on. That's fine, but at the same time, we also don't need to forget that there's another side of the city. And the other side of the city is the city which is the opposite. Is the city that stays when we're gone. Is a city which is made of stones. The first cities actually thousands of years ago, 7,000 to 10,000 years ago, start coming together around the cemetery. Is a piece of stone that will still be there when life has totally disappeared. Is what remains. Is actually not what changes, but what is permanent. And I think there's also that aspect we don't need to miss. So again, what we need to start from is from the really deep, meaningful things that are important to us as human beings. And then technology is only a mean together. And in some cases also you want to leave it out. Something like, you know, certainly we want to see more and more interactive stuff in the city, but you also don't want to lose that other dimension, which is the beauty that you have when you go through Tallinn and you think about how many souls, how many other people has moved through those stones, are there, and will continue going down those streets after all of us are gone.
I almost feel like finishing the conversation now. But any other questions? Anyone, please?
Maybe I answer then the previous question.
Go ahead.
The last thing that really worked for me as like ID card user was the voting system. But that was like you really download your own program and vote there. So I think that kind of solved many issues, or the browser issue, or the Microsoft issues, all these issues. It just was standalone. That was really good. I think one of the things what Estonian government should have done would be like 1 or 2 softwares what run on your computer, and you do things through that, and that could be solve all the compatibility issues. So like it's just, and all the apps are working much better these days. Like all the phone, like I trust my phone much more than my computer. And I think that's how this, because it's kind of personal, you kind of know that it's harder to hack because it's much more controlled. So it just, I think it should go much more this independence should survive, but I think it needs to find another form than open web, maybe. Just maybe complementary. You have a couple of options. You can do it through your mobile phone, or you can do it through browser if it works for you. But just I feel what has happened, some of these systems have excluded or made it very stressful to some part of society to use these services. If that kind of remotely answered your question.
Yeah, but in a way, still, if you look at the take-up rates, when take-up rates in Estonia are very high, so it's like still people do use ID cards and the EID in general. But of course, obviously, it's just an experiment for like a small country like this, and there are like technological challenges as well.
It's like people do use because they kind of have to use it, but is it a pleasant use, or is it? I think that's the quality of everyday practice. Well, I guess it's kind of deviating out of the overall topic, but I just wanted to keep an eye on that the social aspects and the regular user are not suffering from the revolution.
You know, one of the things maybe that I would like to, oh, here you go, Lev. I'll ask mine later.
So So why do you think it's so beautiful to be in this amazing space? Because it was not designed to be the Congress space, right? If you're in New York, would you rather hang out in Midtown or in Meatpacking District? So I think the architecture gives us amazing lesson, but people want complexity, and complexity is created from misuse, right? And the, you know, we're still using.
No. Do we have another speaker or like another mic?
No. That's okay. Oh, I think it's better. No, I think it's okay. No, so I think architecture, right? What happens to architecture teaches us is that, you know, we shouldn't design things only for efficiency, right? We should basically, you know, take into account the fact that the most interesting places in our cities are ones which are not designed for their current use. In the Meatpacking District, well, this amazing thing where Tarkovsky, according to a legend, was shooting Stalker, and now we're having a symposium, right? I mean, you all, you know, and the internet was a kind of mistake which was not designed for what it is today. So I think if we're talking about third industrial revolution, maybe we should also rethink the idea of efficiency, which is really first industrial revolution idea, and think about how we can design whole technological systems which will be used, misused in a completely unpredictable ways. Because I think that's the kind of lesson of the last 30 years, in fact, from architecture in the cities which we get, right?
Well, just generally, I don't know, I don't want to expand on that because I always found the idea of making mistakes very human. Like that's something we just do. One of the things we do as humans, we make mistakes. So that's one of the reasons computers give us wrong outputs, because we enter the wrong inputs. So there is always a way, I don't know, just looking at all the sci-fi movies, you know, the human always survives because he or she makes something that doesn't make any sense to the computer at some point in the movie, you know, in case of a movie. And that's one of the things that I think is so vital to humans and to designing our spaces as well, to always allow for space to accommodate, you know, something unpredictable.
Well, I would say this to me really says another very deep and important thing is actually that as what we've been doing for thousands of years is actually to go into a certain environment and modify it and appropriate it. And that's why when you come here in a place that had a totally different function, but you know, could accommodate us if we change it, this transformation, even just by the very fact that we are sitting here in this space, we are transforming by our very presence, make it our space. And that's why, you know, we feel so comfortable in such space. And again, it's a very important thing. If this had been like a beautifully optimized, perfect space, you know, that auditorium and so on, wouldn't have at all the same quality. Here, we feel a special quality because we've appropriated, and that appropriation happens just because we are sitting here and we are here. And something that comes to mind is, you know, when you say this, you could say then, you know, again, you know, fuck architecture, you know, who cares, you know, you can design anything and then, you know, just life will take over. I don't think it's like that. Again, I think architecture still has a role, design in general, the role we were saying before, to propose new things, to show new universe that can have then the beginning of a critical discussion. But yes, it reminds me something that happened to Le Corbusier. You know, again, you know, we've been talking about the poor guy quite a bit today. And as you might know, in the 1920s, he designed a beautiful new neighborhood next to Bordeaux called Pessac. He put together all of his ideas about modern housing and living were condensed into this new neighborhood. And then this was handed over to people. And then a few decades later, a sociologist called Philippe Boudon went there, wrote a book called Pessac by Le Corbusier, was published, I believe, in 1973, so probably 40, 50 years later. And what he found was actually that all the stuff had been totally destroyed by people. The purity of these kind of white cubes now had pitched roof, had something that looks like, you know, mountain chalets and so on. And so he went there, documented all of this, you know, the transformation by life. And in that case, Le Corbusier says something that, you know, what you said reminded me what Le Corbusier responded. At the time, you know, I think it was probably actually in the 60s. So he was at the end of his life, and he looked at all of this, at all this transformation, and he said, you know, l'architecture a tort, c'est la vie qui a raison. Architecture is wrong, life is right. And I think that's probably the lesson.
Well, shall we
Can I ask a question, please?
finish?
Can I
One
ask
last
a
question then.
Actually, my question is for Professor Carlo, but anyone can answer also. We've been talking about 50 billion mobile phones by 2020, and also you were talking about waste. I'm concerned about e-waste and technological waste, which is already polluting waters and environment around us. And if we are thinking about self-driven cars, technology, I mean, we'll be having so much technological waste. What will happen to the already existing technology which will be waste? Will it be dumped in Africa and India? What are you thinking about waste?
Okay, well, I'll take a stab at it. So, first of all, let me say, because we were asking that question, for instance, in doing the project of tracking trash, because ourselves we are putting little tags onto waste, so we are adding waste to waste. But the question is, if you do this, can you actually save because of what you learn? It's the same question, we use energy on the internet, but if we use the internet to whatever, control a thermostat in our home, in millions of homes, that amount of energy that we can save can be an order of magnitude, 2 orders of magnitudes bigger. So one thing we want to say is that sometimes we need to look at the whole balance. Sometimes you might accept a little bit more waste or a little bit more energy consumption if that allows you to reduce other waste or other energy consumption. If your cell phone allows you to share more things, to be part of the sharing economy, and so to avoid buying more car and more washing machines and you name it, then maybe that we can tolerate. But it's a very good point what you mentioned. That's kind of the general question. Let's always look at the overall picture. Sometimes you can tolerate the energy consumption of the internet is also a lot if that allows us to reduce it elsewhere because of the internet itself. And the same thing about waste. At the same time, the second part of the question I would give is more technical. And, how do we deal with the waste? Now, the good thing is that today we actually have ways that allow us to do it better. So I think already today we can use what is called plasma. If you burn this bottle, made of water, out of this plastic or other plastic, usually you get molecules that can be very polluting for the environment. But actually, if you burn it all the way at plasma level, what happens is that all of the molecular bonds between atoms disappear, and what you get out of that is just the pure atoms. So if you use a plasma treatment that you can use with e-waste and other things, then what you're getting back just the original components, the original atoms, and you can also recycle that. You get back like a rock, which is non-polluting, and in the rock you got all the different atoms that you had in the original material. So I think there's a lot of interesting developments there that will allow us technologically to solve the problem. The first answer was more philosophical about, let's always look at the big picture. This is more technological. I think here we can do something. I think there's interesting development in doing circuits that can be biodegradable circuits and so on, and there's a lot of work in that. And the third thing is that because really of Internet of Everything, because being able to track things, we'll be able to manage waste better. Imagine that each piece has different tags, and then tomorrow a little robot can take all the different parts of your phone. Some of it will go to plasma and you reuse it. Some of it will actually be reused in a more at a higher level in the chain. What you want to do, you always want to reuse things at the highest possible level in the chain. So if something is already a very specific molecule, ideally you want to keep that and reuse that. If you cannot disentangle it, you want to go down to plasma and go back to the individual components. But from an energy point of view, that's more expensive. So in a certain sense, if you had all these little tags into waste, you could then stay at the highest level in the chain, but be able tomorrow to digitally sort out things in a better way. So the last part, as I say, are possible technological solutions, and all of them are interesting. We're still very, very far from the beauty of nature. The ideal thing would be, can we actually tomorrow grow an iPhone like we grow a tree? It's something that then you throw away and the nature goes back to the original components and can rebuild another tree, another plant. Can we do that for a house? We are not there yet. We are so immature, so coarse compared to what nature does. But I think the longer term technologically can be more in that direction.
Thank you.
All right. Well, yeah. Thank you, Lev. I think our panel definitely deserves applause. And before we all go to lunch, well, first of all, lunch can be bought over in the Tab Club. I think it's what, 1:27 right now, so we still have a little bit over half an hour to have lunch. I hope everybody's okay with that. And then we're going to start with the next session, the data session, here at 2 p.m. And one little thing, since we were talking about the third industrial revolution, e-government and all of that, one of our sponsors is the Plus ID card, and all of our panelists get one. Here you go. Thank you very much for participating. Me.
And all of you are going to get 3D printer sandwiches now.